Welcome to the Estates Made Simple podcast with Jenna Carvello and Gordon Vanderleek. We are on a mission to simplify the world of estate administration, helping executors gain the knowledge required to manage an estate. Please note, the following is for informational purposes only and is not to be considered legal, tax, or financial advice. We recommend you seek individualized advice for your unique situation with qualified professionals.
Thank you everyone for joining us today. We're here for another exciting and enticing conversation about the exciting world of estate management. Gord, nice to see you as always. You look very dapper today.
Thank you. I was actually in court this morning. So that may be part of what we're talking about is how do you avoid people like me having to put a suit and tie on and going downtown, keep matters out of court. But yeah, it's always good to canvass some of these topics. And I think, the topic we talked about is what about habits of a successful executor? So maybe kick it off. I like the topic, maybe looking ahead, saying almost tips, right? Or traps to avoid those sorts of things. So yeah, give us some thoughts on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, both in our practices, we've worked with several professional executors as well as lay people who've acted as an executor. And we've consolidated some themes around what successful executors do, common traits and common tips. So we thought we'd share with our listeners today what those tips are so that you could follow them and try to embody those themes as you're going through the estate administration process. So first, I wanted to define what a successful estate administration is. And I know we've spoken at length in previous podcasts, about a timely administration, the least amount of disputes as possible, and I underline if possible, as well as maximizing the value of the estate. So all of those components really make up a successful administration. And so, Gord, I'll let you share the first theme of what you've seen a successful executor do.
Yeah, it's on time management, I think is a good broad description of a good habit for executors. So I guess that would be if you find yourself in that role, trying to develop systems or have some thought as to managing your time and keeping that moving forward. It's interesting, I think, in this case that in the area of estate administration, it might be different than certainly in my world, other transactional work or other areas of the law. Like if you're doing a big corporate commercial deal or you're closing on a real estate transaction, it might be very compressed and there's a closing date, whereas you go, well, there isn't that sort of event really with estate administration. It can seem a little bit amorphous to say, well, when do I have to get it done? We talked about an executor's year, and obviously we need to keep it moving forward, but it's not like there is necessarily a hard and fast deadline. What's appropriate is dependent upon the facts of each case, right? And the circumstances of each particular estate and the assets you're dealing with and the complexity or simplicity of that estate. But I think it's helpful both when you're maybe trying to pick an executor or if you find yourself an executor going, I have to manage this time commitment. We talked earlier about problems or, having to get, Gord, the estate litigator involved, and go off to court is sometimes in cases where you can say, well, it's a good person, they meant well, but they just didn't manage their time very well. And it just took forever to get the estate administered. And eventually the beneficiaries get frustrated and they hire lawyers and it's before a judge and you're kind of accountable for what did you do. So I think a good habit would be to say, dedicate the time, be realistic. I mean, I guess ultimately at the front end, before you accept it and before you lose the ability to renounce, you want to make sure, do I have the time for this? But assuming you go, yeah, no, I can do it. It's a matter just like with everything, you have to put it on the calendar. You have to dedicate the time to get it done. And I think so having good time management skills would be good. If you know that you have a tendency to procrastinate, then figure out a way, that you can avoid that happening, because that's just going to lead to poor results and potential liability. Like if you miss deadlines, you don't communicate, you don't keep things moving forward. Those are all the backdrop for beneficiaries making a claim against the estate and saying, well, you owe me some money because you messed up, right? So I think if you can manage your time and juggle, as we all have to do with various commitments, whether it's family, you've got work commitments, travel commitments, and the like, that you want to keep it moving forward. And I think if you take the perspective of, okay, it's not high pressure, but you can't by the same token, just ignore it because it maybe doesn't shout out as something immediate, right? That you want every, on a regular basis to take a look at it and say, what are my tasks? What are my deadlines? I got to put time in the calendar to spend with this and just prioritize it, right? So it doesn't be, oh, every day you have to spend 4 hours on this. Maybe there's a lot of work at the front end, but then it's a matter of, okay, maybe once a week, or you've got regular time where you're communicating, you're investigating, you're asking questions, talking to professionals along the way. So I think dedicating regular time on your calendar to, like any other project you're responsible for, will ensure you're going to stay on top of it. And so, yeah, I know in my world, if we don't get things on the calendar, then it doesn't happen. Oh, I'll deal with that next week. Oh, I'll deal with that next week. Oh, I'll deal with that next month. Well, that's not good time management. So I think if you do a good job on managing your time and just keep it moving forward, like push that ball. You don't need like the big long, like using the football analogy, the Hail Mary pass, and you go, well, that was a miraculous play. Well, no, but you just get a yard or two every week and the ball will eventually end up in the end zone, right? If you just have regular progress, and you have generally time to work on this, you just have to spend the time on it.
Absolutely. Well, another theme that I've noticed professional and successful executors do is provide regular updates to beneficiaries. This one seems so relevant, but also so obvious that if you're dealing with a bunch of beneficiaries, you need to be open and honest with them. You need to provide them regular updates so that they're not wondering where the estate administration is at. They're not wondering if you're taking the money and running. They're kept up to speed as to what tasks are being done and also what issues they may be coming into. Because if the estate administration is extending past the 1 year time period, there may be issues that you're dealing with that beneficiaries maybe or should know, so that they're not asking questions about if you're qualified to do the job or if you're messing up in the details. And so this is something I've never met a successful executor do a great job without accounting properly to beneficiaries. I would say this is a necessary skill to have, and I couldn't highlight the importance enough.
Absolutely. And even if you go, everything's in control, or there's nothing urgent and I don't have to do, I'm waiting on something else. Well, just providing that update going, well, yeah, I'm waiting for this and we're doing this and I'll check back in with you in a couple months, right? Then they know, as opposed to their brain will go to a worst case scenario going, this guy's incompetent. He's, not managing the money properly. So even if the report is, there's nothing to report, we'll do that. Right.
Yeah.
That's communicating. At least they know you're on top of it and there's nothing to be done right now, and letting them know. Right. So I agree wholeheartedly. Very much, if a file comes into my office and it's an estate dispute, and usually I look at it, it's very common to say, had there been better communication, it would never come to my desk.
Right.
Right. And usually it's a lack of communication that just gets people upset, right? Or assuming the worst. So good communication, I think, is, as you say, almost trite. But because it may seem like it's less important, I think it's important for us to emphasize it here. It's really important to do that. I think it's a great habit. Another one I find is that, I guess, another habit would be to be objective in your decision making, because I think for some people, they struggle with this. They go, well, this is what I would do for myself. But making a decision on behalf of an estate, you are making decisions for somebody else, right? So you almost have to set aside your own assumptions about it and look at it objectively to say, well, what is appropriate in the circumstances, right? If you have a particularly difficult beneficiary, you may go, I really don't like that person, so I'm not going to communicate with them. Okay, well, objectively, as we just said, you're supposed to communicate. So objectively, you have to set aside that you really don't like that person or they're being annoying to you. Well, that doesn't mean you shouldn't communicate, right? So just understanding that even if you say, well, personally, this is what I would do, you have an obligation to maximize the benefit of the estate, and you have to do things almost extrapolating from your own personal perspective, right? And this is where I think it's important to get some legal advice, accounting advice, other financial advice with regard to, what's appropriate and what is in the best interest of the estate, right? You're selling the house that's part of the estate, the real estate. well, just because oh yeah, that seems like a reasonable offer. Well, no, objectively, you should go and get some backup to say, well, is that a fair offer? What would, talk to a realtor? Should I counter? What should I do? Get information for the marketplace, not just, yeah, I just feel like accepting the offer and I just want to get rid of this house, right? Well, that's not being objective, as an interesting example. So I think on that, trying to set aside the emotions, and there may be family dynamics, a difficult beneficiary, you want to set those aside and say, but I'm still going to conduct myself in a professional manner, even though in my heart of hearts, I want to do something different because I don't want to communicate with that beneficiary. I want to tell them where to go. Well, okay, you can't do that. You got to be seen as an example, being even-handed, right? You can't treat one beneficiary worse than the other. That's going to land you into trouble. That's being objective, even though you go, well, I like this beneficiary, a really nice person, and this person's a jerk. Well, no, you can't treat them differently because of your opinion of their character and whether they're likable people or not. So yeah, I think on that, you want to act in the best interests of the beneficiary, make good decisions, and be as objective as you can, kind of be Switzerland, right? Try to be, where you might have an opinion, but maybe it's a situation where you can't take an opinion, right? If there's a dispute, you're supposed to not take an opinion one side or the other in favor. And these are all examples of, I think, just want to be objective in your decision making. So I'd put that as our kind of third habit that will lead to success. And I think those that are in this role, that they can clearly separate, I'm doing this as a job and I'm going to do my job well, as opposed, and can if appropriate, separate out their personal opinion versus I'm going to do what's objectively the right thing, even if I don't agree with it, right?
I find it an interesting scenario when you have an executor appointed that is also a beneficiary, because a decision for the estate as a whole may not be best suited for that individual executor slash beneficiary, but it's best for the estate. So making a decision that's not best for you is a difficult thing, but you have to do it if you're appointed the executor or
Yes.
trustee. And then, the final theme that I know we've discussed before is to rely on experts. Successful executors hire people to help them in the course of the estate administration. Executors are not expected to be experts in absolutely everything, but they are expected to know when they need to seek help, whether that be a tax specialist to help with tax matters, a legal expert to help with the legal matters, a real estate expert to sell the real property, maybe a certified appraiser to come in and value all the assets. So all of those experts really come into play when the executor is administering the estate, and successful executors know when to seek help and know what they don't know.
Exactly. And I guess related to the time management issue would be, if you're not sure, go get the advice, right? Because sometimes uncertainty about what the next step is, or I'm not sure what I should do, could lead to some paralysis in decision making. So I think following that advice of getting experts might facilitate that first comment about the time management, right? Because then if you delegate, it may get done a little quicker, or you don't have the time to figure things out yourself. Well, you're allowed to hire people to help you with that, right? So that you don't wait for when you do have time. If it's a particularly busy month or a busy season of life, you can carry that forward. So I think that's appropriate. You want to keep things, develop momentum. I think for a lot of people, they kind of get stuck and they just need to get going. And once they get going, then the other tasks become easier. So utilize experts to develop that momentum. And if you just keep things moving forward, you've got an answer if a beneficiary is saying, well, what did you do? And that's better than saying, well, yeah, I did nothing for 6 months. Right. That's hard to justify. And, those are the sort of scenarios that end up in court, or some claims against you personally to say, you didn't invest the money properly, or you didn't deal with this expeditiously. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think those are good final comments, Gord. Thank you everyone for listening. If you have ideas for other topics, feel free to submit them. Please subscribe to anywhere you listen to podcasts, and you can see our lovely faces on YouTube if you are so inclined. Thank you very much, everyone, and we'll talk to you soon, Gord.
I know.